Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Dear friends who love true stories filled with mystery and wisdom, have you sent blessings upon the Prophet today? Let's begin this video by reciting sholawat for our beloved Prophet Muhammad Shallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Because behind this story lies a dark secret that will shake your heart. Imagine a shabby man, rocking with a foul odor, carrying nothing but a plastic bag. Mocked, secretly recorded, and judged as a beggar by arrogant wealthy people. But little did they know, he is the owner of hundreds of properties and capable of buying a 2 billion rupiah luxury car, paid in full, no credit. How could everyone be fooled? Why did he disguise himself as a poor man? And what awaits those who look down on others? The answers will shift your perspective on dignity, faith, and who truly deserves to be called noble. Watch until the end, because the twist in this story will be the last thing you ever expect.
That morning, the city streets looked as usual. Vehicles passed back and forth, pedestrians hurried to work, and street vendors began setting up their stalls. Amid the hustle and bustle, a man around 40 years old walked slowly with heavy steps. His clothes were wrinkled, his shirt full of patches, and his body gave off an unpleasant odor that made people steer clear. In his hand, he clutched an old, worn-out black plastic bag that seemed worthless. A few motorcyclists gave him judgmental looks. A mother walking with her child pulled the little one away. "Don't get too close, he's crazy," she whispered, quickening her pace. The man kept his head down, as if indifferent to their stares or insults. His steps were steady, heading toward one place, a luxury car showroom in the heart of the city. In front of the showroom, two salesmen standing by the entrance exchanged glances. They chuckled as the man approached. "Uh-oh. Looks like someone's here to beg," one of them whispered. The scruffy man stood for a moment in front of the showroom window, staring inside. His eyes locked onto a single vehicle, an all-new, jet-black luxury SUV that had just been released a few months ago. Its price? 2 billion rupiah. A security guard stepped out of the door and waved his hand dismissively. "Sorry sir, if you want to rest, please don't do it here. It'll bother our other customers," he said, half shooing him away. The man looked at the guard calmly, without anger, and softly said, "I want to buy that car." The guard and the two salesmen burst out laughing. One of them even patted the man's shoulder mockingly. "Are you serious? That car's not for beggars. Don't waste our time." The situation quickly turned into a spectacle. Some people nearby began taking photos and recording videos, laughing at the man who looked like a homeless person claiming he wanted to buy a luxury car. But suddenly, the man pulled something out of his black plastic bag, a thick stack of cash, neatly wrapped in plastic bank seals. The laughter stopped instantly. One of the salesmen stammered, "So, is that real cash?" The man nodded. 2 billion. I want that car. Right now. No credit. No delay." Everyone in the showroom froze. The faces that had mocked him moments ago turned pale, and some of those recording quickly lowered their phones. But the man simply gave a small smile and said, "I came here to buy a car, not to be respected. But sometimes, people need to be humiliated first, so they can realize who they truly are." Inside the showroom, the atmosphere shifted drastically. The air that once brimmed with laughter and arrogance now hung heavy with awkward silence. The man in patched clothes stood firmly, not raising his voice, not demanding respect. His calm presence sent ripples of unease through everyone who had just mocked him. One of the salesmen, the younger of the two, fumbled to collect himself. He stepped forward, suddenly all smiles. "Welcome, sir. Please, come in. Let me show you the details of the car." The older salesman glared at his colleague, realizing how quickly fear could turn pride into submission. The guard, still stunned, quietly opened the door wider, as if trying to erase his earlier mistake. The man stepped in. The glossy floor of the showroom reflected his dusty sandals. His presence felt like a storm moving through polished glass. Other customers who had been browsing cars now stepped aside, giving him a wide berth, some out of guilt, some still skeptical, and others out of silent respect. He walked straight toward the black SUV without hesitation. "This one," he said. "I've been watching it for weeks." "Of course, sir," the younger salesman said quickly. "Fully loaded. Latest model. We can have it ready within the hour." He sounded like a man desperate to make amends, to secure a sale that now seemed more like a miracle. The man turned to him slowly. I'm not here for the specs. I already know everything. I've researched. I've planned. This is not an impulse. He then pulled out his ID, a neatly folded bank statement, and a transaction record. Everything was legitimate. The bank seal on the cash, the registered account under his name, and even his tax status, all in order. As they verified the details, the senior salesman, who had laughed the loudest earlier, stepped aside and whispered into the guard's ear, "Find out who he is. This is strange. No one like him walks in with that kind of money." The guard nodded and discreetly stepped outside to make a phone call. Meanwhile, inside, the transaction was proceeding smoothly. The man didn't smile in satisfaction, nor boast about proving anyone wrong. Instead, he sat silently in the lounge area, sipping a small cup of tea, his gaze fixed out the window. He watched the world rush by. Honking cars. Hurried pedestrians. People with no idea that something extraordinary had just happened inside that building. When asked if he needed delivery or driver, he simply replied, "I'll drive it myself." He then glanced at the showroom manager and added, "Once this is done, I'll leave. But you might want to tell your staff, next time, measure people by heart, not their shoes." He said it without anger, without pride. But his words hit like thunder. And outside, the security guard was still on the phone. But the information he was about to receive would shock everyone in that building. Outside the showroom, the security guard stood at the corner of the building, pressing his phone to his ear. His voice was a whisper, as if afraid someone might overhear. "Hey, bro. Can you help me check a name? There's this strange guy, looks like a homeless man, but he just bought a 2 billion rupiah car in cash. I'm serious." On the other end, the voice responded quickly, filled with curiosity. "What's his name?" The guard pulled out a small note where he had jotted down the man's details from earlier. "His name's Abdul Rohim. Address, wait, some elite housing complex in the south. But his look and behavior don't match at all." A few minutes later, the tone on the phone changed dramatically. "Bro, are you serious? That's a big name. He's one of the biggest property owners in Jabodetabek. Extremely low profile. Owns boarding houses, apartments, shop buildings, worth hundreds of billions." The guard's heart pounded faster. His hand trembled as he ended the call. He stood frozen, trying to absorb the truth he had just learned. Abdul Rohim, the scruffy man they nearly kicked out of the showroom, was one of the country's quietest tycoons. As he walked back inside, his face looked pale. He approached the showroom manager, who was preparing the final documents. "Sir, I just found out. That man isn't just anyone." The manager turned to him. "What do you mean?" "He owns dozens of properties. A big shot. They say his assets are worth hundreds of billions." The manager's eyes widened. "Astagfirullah. We just humiliated someone like that." They both turned to look at the man, who was now sitting calmly, checking his watch. The younger salesman still looked nervous and awkward, while the older one couldn't even meet his eyes. Moments later, a driver from the showroom arrived with the keys and completed paperwork. But the man declined the offer. He signed all the documents himself and stood up slowly. Before leaving, he looked around the room with a calm yet piercing gaze. "Thank you for the service. I hope your day ends with more wisdom than it started." Without another word, he opened the door himself, stepped out quietly, and started his brand new car. The engine purred softly before fading into the sound of the city traffic. The people inside the showroom remained silent. No one dared to speak. Shame hung in the air like a thick fog. And in the corner of the waiting lounge, one customer who had been watching the whole time shook his head slowly and whispered, "This is proof. Appearances can deceive. And arrogance can humiliate you deeper than anything else." The afternoon sky had begun to turn orange when the scruffy old man suddenly appeared in front of a luxury car showroom in the heart of the city. A worn-out black plastic bag was still tightly clutched in his left hand. A few visitors and showroom staff standing near the entrance exchanged puzzled glances, as if they couldn't believe what they were seeing. A neatly dressed security guard stepped forward, trying to remain polite, but his tone carried a clear note of condescension. "Sir, this is a luxury car showroom. If you just want to look around, that's fine. But please don't touch anything. These are expensive," he said with a smirk. The old man simply nodded. He didn't say a word. Instead, He walked slowly toward the glass display where a bright red sports car gleamed under the lights. "That one," he said softly. "I want to buy that one. Now." Instantly, everyone who heard him froze. The room fell silent. A showroom employee who had been pouring coffee nearly dropped the cup in his hand. "You mean, you want to buy that car?" one of the sales representatives asked, frowning in disbelief. The old man nodded again, then opened the black plastic bag he had been carrying. Inside were stacks of high-denomination bills, hundreds of thousands, even 1 million rupiah notes, neatly bundled with rubber bands. Tens of millions. Hundreds of millions. No one knew exactly how much. But it was clearly enough to pay for the car that many only dreamed of owning. One of the showroom supervisors rushed inside to call the manager, while several other employees began taking notes, counting, and verifying the cash. Every bill was authentic. People who just moments ago had looked at the man with disgust were now scrambling to offer him drinks, a seat, even asking for selfies. The same sales rep who had mocked him now bowed slightly and said, "I'm so sorry, sir. I didn't know. You're incredible. May I ask where you live?" The old man looked straight at them, his expression calm, his smile steady. "I live in a place you don't see," he said flatly. "A place you never care to look. But from there, I can see who's truly human, and who's just pretending to be noble." He then signed the purchase papers. No loans. No terms. Just cash. Cash that had been dismissed as worthless by people who had never really known him. The engine of the luxury car growled gently, cutting through the quiet of the evening as the old man drove away from the showroom, leaving everyone behind in stunned silence and shame. And outside the gates, the people who had once secretly recorded him now did the same again. But this time, they filmed in awe. But this time, they weren't laughing anymore. The sky began to turn golden, signaling that the sun was ready to set beyond the western horizon. A gentle evening breeze blew as Mulyadi approached an old food stall tucked in the corner of the market, almost hidden behind piles of carts and worn-out banners. That was where the mysterious man had disappeared. To most market-goers, the stall was nothing more than a shabby place to grab a bite, unremarkable, even eerie in its appearance. Mulyadi swallowed hard. His heart was filled with curiosity, tinged with caution. He stepped slowly toward the half-opened door of the stall. The clinking of cutlery and the aroma of traditional dishes wafted from inside. Peeking in without a sound, he saw the disheveled man sitting quietly in a corner, enjoying a simple plate of rice with salted fish and spicy shrimp paste. There was no luxury, no waiters, just a single stove, an old wooden table, and a rickety dish rack on the verge of collapsing. What made Mulyadi's eyes widen, however, was when a middle-aged man entered carrying property documents. He bowed respectfully, then handed a brown folder to the shabby man. "Sir, here are the certificates for 5 shop lots in Tanjung Barot. They've all been purchased under your name." Mulyadi could barely believe it. The man simply nodded calmly, even offering the middle-aged visitor some rice. "Have a meal first, Mr. Hendra. The salted fish is good. The sambal's made by my wife," he said with a warm smile. After the man left, Mulyadi finally gathered the courage to step inside. The stall's creaky door let out a soft groan as he entered. "Excuse me," he greeted, his voice slightly trembling. The man looked up. His gaze was deep, yet calm. "Have a seat. There's still some rice left. Want to eat?" Mulyadi shook his head. "I just want to know, who are you really?" The man took a slow breath, then set his spoon down on the edge of his plate. "My name is Dato. I used to be just like those who mocked me, arrogant, wealthy, blind with pride. Until one day, God flipped everything. I went bankrupt, was slandered, and my first wife left me. But that's when I learned, dignity can't be bought with a fancy suit or a luxury car." Mulyadi sat in silence, his eyes beginning to mist over. He never expected that behind such a worn-out appearance was a man with extraordinary strength of heart. Mr. Dato continued, "I dress like this not because I have to, but because I want to know, are there still people who can see a heart, not just a surface? Sadly, not many." Outside the stall, the Maghrib call to prayer echoed through the air. Mulyadi didn't respond. His heart felt like it had been struck by truth, sharp and undeniable. The man once ridiculed turned out to be far richer, in wealth and in soul. But the story wasn't over. That night, something unexpected happened in the market. An event that would make everyone begin to see Mr. Dato in a completely different light. You said. That evening, the sky was overcast. The golden glow of dusk was hidden behind a thick blanket of grey clouds hanging above the city. In the courtyard of a small mosque near the market, the call to Maghrib prayer echoed, resonating deep within the hearts of all who heard it. And there, he appeared again, the man in tattered clothes who had become the talk of the neighborhood. His name was slowly starting to surface. Someone who once worked at the local district office suddenly recognized him. "He's not just some random guy," the former clerk whispered, pointing toward the man. "He used to come to City Hall often, but always quietly. His clothes were plain, but when he handled his land affairs, he bought 5 plots at once, paid in cash." Whispers began to spread. Rumors moved as swiftly as the wind through street vendors, parking attendants, and the mosque's congregation. Who was he, really? Was he truly a disguised billionaire? Or just a legend laced with dramatic storytelling? Then came irrefutable proof. A sleek black luxury car pulled up by the roadside, its license plate clearly special. A young man in a tailored suit stepped out and respectfully greeted the shabby-looking man, then opened the car door for him. Every eye watched in disbelief. Some even swallowed hard, ashamed for having mocked and belittled him. "Sir, the schedule for the new site in Pamulang is all set," said the young man politely. The older man nodded. He said little, only smiling as he glanced around, meeting the eyes of those who had once looked down on him. His gaze held no anger, no desire for revenge, only a calm look filled with forgiveness. The car drove away, leaving behind a frozen crowd. The fried snack vendor who once drove him away now hung his head. The shopkeeper woman who had secretly recorded him hurried to delete the video from her phone. And night slowly descended, bringing a silence that pressed heavy on the chest. No one had imagined that behind the worn-out clothes and plastic bag hid a man of immense wealth, not just of money, but of heart. His true worth wasn't about riches, but the greatness of his soul. "If only I had known," whispered one resident, but the sentence was never finished. The dark sky was no gloomier than the hearts of those who had just begun to realize who the shabby-looking man truly was. And yet, the man never showed any sign of hurt. Instead, he returned to the mosque the next day, walking casually with a white plastic bag in hand, wearing the same clothes as before. People started approaching him, this time not to mock or dismiss him, but out of sincere curiosity. A young man from the shop next door mustered the courage to walk up to him. "Sir, excuse me, may I ask why you live like this? Even though, they say you have everything." The man looked at the young man gently. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he sat down on a wooden bench near the mosque's small garden, gazing up at the now clearing sky. "Young man," he said softly, "I used to have a big house, many cars, hundreds of employees. But not everything that's big brings peace." The young man fell silent, frozen in place. The man continued. "I used to chase numbers. I thought happiness lived in a bank account. But after my wife passed away, and my son moved far away, my home became just an empty building. My heart was hollow, even though all the luxury remained." He gripped the small plastic bag in his hand. Inside were just 2 dates, a worn prayer mat, and a bottle of mineral water. "I chose to live like this because I wanted to rediscover the meaning of true sustenance. Not the kind kept in safes, but the kind that is shared from the heart." His words struck gently, like a quiet slap. A few residents who had been listening from a distance bowed their heads. They had once raced to flaunt their income, yet their hearts were empty. While this man, in solitude and simplicity, held a richness of spirit no money could buy. At that moment, someone who had once driven him away now approached, carrying a plate of warm rice and a glass of tea. "Sir, I'm the one who used to yell at you. Please forgive me. If you don't mind, would you eat with me here?" The man smiled. He said nothing in return, only accepted the plate with both hands and softly replied, "Jazakallahu khairan." That day, the market wasn't as crowded as usual. But the hearts around that man felt much fuller. Everyone began to understand that true greatness could not be measured by how someone dressed or the thickness of their wallet. True greatness is when a person stays humble, even when they have every right to boast or retaliate. And the man kept walking as usual, as if nothing had ever happened. But his footsteps were now etched in the hearts of many. Dusk cloaked the Jakarta sky as a line of black cars pulled up in front of a luxurious hotel. The footsteps of formally dressed men stepped out of their vehicles with an air of authority. They were major investors, tycoons, and business elites invited to an exclusive property auction that evening. The grand ballroom had been lavishly decorated, with round tables covered in white linen and crystal chandeliers glittering above like dancing stars. But what shocked everyone that night wasn't the price of the properties on offer. It was who bought them. When the name of the first bidder was announced, all eyes widened. In the name of Mr. Sorja Permadi, initial bid, 25 billion rupiah, paid in cash. A murmur spread across the room. Some older businessmen turned to one another, puzzled. The name was unfamiliar. Who was he? Why had no one heard of him in the elite circles of property moguls? Then, slowly, the back door of the ballroom opened. Soft footsteps echoed closer. A man in a tattered jacket, worn-out trousers, flip-flops, and a face recognized by some guests as the beggar they had mocked just a week ago, calmly walked toward the registration desk. The eyes of the staff widened in disbelief. The mouths of the businessmen hung open. He was the one they had humiliated. He was the one they secretly recorded on their phones. And now, he stood among them, calmly handing over a check worth billions of rupiah. "I don't like small talk," he said briefly, his deep voice slicing through the silence. "I'm buying this property. Cash." One investor stood abruptly, his face flushed red. "This is a joke, right? How can someone dressed like that afford an asset this huge?" The man gave only a faint smile. He turned to the committee. "Check my name. All documents were submitted through my legal team 2 days ago." And it was true. The committee verified everything. All ownership papers were in order. The funds had been transferred. Not a single detail was amiss. Several guests began to leave the room, ashamed, angry, their pride shattered by a truth they could no longer deny. Meanwhile, the man they had once looked down on now sat calmly in his seat, signing document after document as the new owner of 4 luxury towers, once the top target of powerful business titans. Not a single one of them had seen it coming. Not a single one could say a word. Because that night, the truth silenced every trace of arrogance that had once taken root in their chests. The Maghrib call to prayer echoed faintly in the distance. And the man, before continuing the transaction, spoke softly. "Worldly affairs are just tools. Don't let them make us forget how to respect one another." Until that moment, the grand ballroom felt quieter than a grave. That morning, the sky was still covered with a light veil of clouds as the old man walked slowly toward a luxurious building marked with a sign, "Luxury Car Showroom," right in the heart of the city. His appearance remained unchanged, worn-out jacket, dirty flip-flops, but this time, his steps were firm. His face remained calm, even as several showroom employees began glancing at him with suspicion. A security guard standing near the door quickly approached. "Excuse me, sir, may I help you?" he asked, blocking the man's path with a stiff posture. The old man smiled and pulled out a thin wallet from the almost torn pocket of his jacket. From inside, he took out a sleek business card bearing his full name and title, Property Investor. The guard froze. He read the card again, then looked up at the man's face, unsure whether to believe it or laugh it off. "I'd like to see the latest Alfred unit," the man said casually, as if ordering street food. "Metallic black, please." A showroom manager who had been observing from a distance quickly stepped in, interrupting with a warm smile. "Good morning, sir. Please come in. We have several of the newest variants." "Here's our brochure," he said politely, his tone instantly changing after seeing the card in the guard's hand. A few minutes later, the old man sat comfortably in the plush negotiation lounge, surrounded by staff now treating him with great respect. He read the car's specifications while sipping the warm tea they offered, then pointed to one of the top-tier Alfred models. "This one. Black. What's the total price?" 2,150,000,000 rupiah, sir. We can help with leasing if. "No need," he cut in calmly. "I'll pay in cash." The room fell silent for a moment. It was as if the words didn't belong to a man dressed so plainly, someone they assumed had nothing. With quiet confidence, he pulled out a bank book from the inside of his jacket and opened it, revealing a balance of over 10 billion rupiah. The atmosphere shifted instantly. The same staff who had once looked down on him were now rushing to provide the best service they could. But the man only gave a faint smile. "You assumed I had nothing just because I wear flip-flops," he said softly, yet sharply. "I simply wanted to see, who among you judges a man by his clothes, and who sees beyond, into the heart?" One of the employees, who had secretly recorded him a few days ago, now stood frozen in a corner, face flushed with shame. In front of everyone, the old man signed the purchase documents. The transaction was official. The gleaming black Alford was now his. But before leaving the showroom, he turned around and looked at everyone with deep eyes. You saw me when you thought I had nothing. Now witness what happens when Allah proves that those you belittle may rise above those you take pride in. Then he walked out toward his new car, leaving behind a showroom that was now silent, not because it was empty, but because everyone inside was swallowing a bitter yet undeniable truth. The evening breeze drifted gently through the parking lot of the minimarket. Everything seemed ordinary, except for one thing that drew every eye. The luxury car that the mysterious man had purchased earlier was now neatly parked among old motorbikes and delivery vans. From the car, the man stepped out slowly. He still wore the same worn-out clothes. His face remained unshaven and dusty. But this time, there was no black plastic bag in his hand. Instead, he carried a small, old-looking sling bag. A parking attendant, who had been observing the man with curiosity since he arrived, finally worked up the courage to ask, "Sir, I'm sorry, but I'm really curious, who are you, actually?" The man smiled, a calm and warm smile, one that held 1,000 secrets. "I'm just an ordinary person," he replied. "But, how could someone like you buy a car like that? And in cash?" the attendant asked, still visibly baffled. The man took a deep breath and looked up at the darkening evening sky. Then he began to share a piece of his story. "I used to be like most people, taking odd jobs, motorbike taxi, construction, anything I could get. But I never complained. Every day I set aside a little money, no matter how small, to buy land. Piece by piece. People said I was crazy, but I believed that land would never lose its value." The attendant fell silent, clearly impressed. "So, what was in the black plastic bag, sir?" he asked again, still curious about the item that had made so many people ridicule the man before. The man chuckled softly. "Just dirty clothes and a pair of broken sandals. I carried them on purpose. I wanted to see who would see me as a human being, and who would judge me only by how I looked." His words struck deep. A few nearby customers who overheard the conversation lowered their heads in shame, especially the wealthy women who had mocked and secretly recorded him just days ago. They quietly walked away, their faces flushed red with guilt. The man then walked toward a small mosque across the street. His steps were calm, as if he carried no grudge in his heart. Upon arriving, he knelt down and whispered a long prayer in silence. He didn't care who had scoffed at him. He didn't retaliate against those who had insulted him. Because he knew, the fate written by God could not be changed by human judgment. And that evening, the setting sun bore witness that true nobility is never found in wealth, but in sincerity. On a bright morning, the sound of birds chirping broke the silence in the small yard of Mr. Cyrif's rented house. A gentle breeze slipped through the slightly open window. Inside, Mr. Cyrif sat cross-legged, staring at a worn piece of paper in his hand. It wasn't an ordinary letter, but an old handwritten note from his late grandfather, filled with life advice and one mysterious thing. A small map with a red dot marking a location once inhabited by his family. If what Grandpa said is true, this might not just be about treasure, Mr. Cyrif muttered, eyes filled with wonder. Without saying much, he rolled the paper and tucked it into the inner pocket of his worn jacket. With steady steps, he walked out of the house. He told no one, not even Mrs. Darmy, though his heart was uneasy. He knew, this day would mark the beginning of all the answers to the riddles he had carried for years. His old motorcycle roared to life again, but this time not to sell bread. This time, it was to seek a truth long buried in silence. The journey led him through a quiet hilly region. Tall trees towered over him, and the occasional crack of twigs sounded like whispers from the past. That place was ancestral land, long abandoned and labeled haunted, deemed unfit for farming. But for Mr. Cyrif, it held the key to everything. Why he chose a simple life despite owning properties, why he hid his true identity, and why he continued to help the poor in secret. After nearly an hour of climbing with effort, he reached an old shack. The building was nearly falling apart, yet still stood among weeds and tree roots. Carefully, Mr. Cyrif pushed open the rotting wooden door. Dust rose into the air, and the smell of old wood filled his lungs. He took a single step inside. Sunlight pierced through the slits between wooden planks, illuminating an old wooden chest tucked in the corner. "Bismillah," he whispered, lifting the lid. Inside, there were no gold coins or diamonds, but stacks of aged, handwritten pages. All of them chronicled his ancestors' struggles, along with the core principle he had lived by, that true wealth lies in hidden good deeds, not in showy riches that invite arrogance and sin. Mr. Cyrif smiled, his eyes brimming with tears. All this time, the secret he carried wasn't about money, but about a spiritual inheritance. And in that moment, he understood, the time had come to reveal the truth, not for pride, but to teach others a lesson. But just before he could step out of the shack, the sound of footsteps echoed from outside. Someone was watching. And this time, it wasn't just a curious neighbor or passerby, but someone who had doubted him from the start, and now sought to take everything he had. The cool night breeze gently swept through the courtyard of the village mosque. The chirping of crickets filled the air, blending with a serene stillness that had lingered ever since the black luxury car disappeared down the road. Yet, for the villagers still seated in a circle on their modest straw mats, the unease in their hearts had not yet settled. Pact, the old man they had long dismissed as insignificant, was now the center of attention. Not because of his humility, but because of the shocking truth. He was the owner of hundreds of properties and an unimaginable fortune. The once skeptical faces had now turned into expressions of regret. Bu Yaya, the wife of the neighborhood chief, bowed her head, pressing her chest as it pounded with guilt. She had once openly told children to stay away from Pact, afraid they might catch poverty. Her husband, the chief himself, stood speechless, as if realizing that the man he had always looked down on had been far wiser and more grounded than himself. Amid the silence, a young man named Rizki finally dared to speak. "Excuse me, Pact, may we ask, why did you choose to live this way, when you could have lived in luxury?" Pact looked at each of them with gentle eyes. There was no anger in his gaze, only calmness and the weight of a life well lived. "Because true wealth isn't about expensive clothes or grand houses," he said softly. "I've been poor. I was insulted, kicked out of rented homes, even slept on sidewalks curled up in the rain. But that's where God showed me, wealth is not meant to be flaunted, but tested, to see how humble we can stay." He paused briefly, then continued. "I started from selling tofu door to door. Every rupiah I earned, I saved and reinvested. Slowly, God opened the way. But I made a promise to myself, if I ever made it, I would never abandon this simple life, so I would never forget where I came from." A wave of emotion spread through the crowd. Some of the mothers began to wipe their tears. Even the neighborhood chief bit his lip, overwhelmed with a shame he couldn't ignore. "Then why didn't you tell us sooner?" another villager asked. "I didn't need recognition," Pact replied. "I just wanted to live in peace. But when I saw how prideful people had become, how easily they judged others based on appearances, I felt the need to teach something, not through preaching, but through something they could feel in their hearts." The villagers fell silent again. Pact words hit like a mirror held up to their own flaws. In the distance, the call to the night prayer, Isya, echoed through the air. Pact rose slowly, a smile on his face. "Come, let's pray. This world is temporary, but what lasts is our charity and goodness in the sight of God." Everyone stood, heads bowed.